So I've only been looking at the main numbered entries, but Final Fantasy is a lot bigger than 15 games. There are so many spin-offs, like Final Fantasy Adventure, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Dissidia Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy Theater Rhythm, how do you say that? And then there's that really obscure one you've probably never heard about. Has some kid named Sora in it, I don't know. Now when people ask what's the best Final Fantasy game on the original PlayStation, you're bound to hear some people say that it was Final Fantasy IX, or Final Fantasy VII, or just maybe you'll hear them call out the most critically celebrated spin-off of them all, Final Fantasy Tactics. A strategy game where every move counts, Tactics had you navigating your players on a grid in order to get the drop on enemies and dominate the battle. Basically think Fire Emblem, but for Final Fantasy. People love this game. Set in the fictional world of Ivalice, you control a soldier named Ramza as he gets thrust into political machinations outside of his control. This game dealt with class, war, and what it means to stay true to your ideals. The story of two friends and the very different paths that these characters would walk. It was a really well done story, and a really fun game. So why am I talking about this? Because the next game in the series, Final Fantasy XII, actually takes place in the same universe, the world of Ivalice. Not only that, but it would also be directed and written by the man at the heart of Tactics, Yasumi Matsuno. Taking the flair of Tactics and injecting it into a big-budget main-entry Final Fantasy game? Well, hell, sign me up! The 6th gen was such a good time for JRPGs. Even though we had our Xenosagas and Symphonias and Nocturnes and Star Oceans, we were still craving the next single-player Final Fantasy game. To the point that for a lot of people, the reason we bought a copy of Dragon Quest VIII was because it came with a demo for Final Fantasy XII. Hey, don't get me wrong. I think you should play Dragon Quest VIII anyway because it's a fantastic game, but we were craving the next entry that much. But an odd thing happened with me and my friends when we finally got to play it. We didn't know what to make of it. This game was drastically different from every other Final Fantasy that came before it. There were no battle transitions, you had to move the camera, characters were doing things on their own without any input. It felt like a single-player MMO. It was a bold new direction for Final Fantasy. We all came out of the demo feeling a little cautious, but still intrigued enough to want to give the game a shot. But finally, in late 2006, the time had come. I had entered my last year of high school. I was now 18 years old. I had waited so long since Final Fantasy X, but it was here. Final Fantasy XII. At long last, I'm ready. And what did I think of it? It was okay. Just okay. I liked the first half of the game. I wouldn't call it a bad title, but by the end of it, I just felt so empty about the experience. The story didn't resonate with me, I wasn't blown away by the soundtrack, and the gameplay was either boring or incredibly frustrating. I didn't like it. In fact, the last time I played Final Fantasy XII was the end of my initial playthrough back in 2007. I wouldn't play this game again until I had to make this video for the retrospective. 12 whole years. But I didn't go into this video expecting the worst. A lot's changed in 12 years. I'm 31 years old, and over time I did gain a new respect for this title, because even though I hadn't played it in a while, I remembered how amazing the dialogue was, how dense Ivalice was with details, the well-directed cutscenes, the bountiful gameplay that would last you for weeks, and man, I had no idea how bad the series was gonna get after this. You start to appreciate the games you didn't like when something worse comes along. Oh, you're next, motherfucker. You're next. I respect the hell out of this game, way more than I did 12 years ago. But that being said, it's still got a ton of problems that still turn me off. This game is a mixed bag, and now I'm gonna talk about it. Also, side note, I am mostly focusing on the original PlayStation 2 game, but I will be talking about the Zodiac Age version as well. It's the most recent re-release that you'll see on Switch, Xbox, etc., and I think ignoring it will make this video feel incomplete. The new version uses a completely different growth system and has a lot of quality of life changes compared to the original. However, this retrospective is still about growing up with Final Fantasy. Zodiac Age came out in 2017, a full 10 years after the original. If I were to gloss over that first entry, this wouldn't be an authentic experience remembering the franchise. This is my history with the series, and I certainly didn't have any with the Zodiac game. As always, I'm going to be talking about everything this game has to offer, so if you don't want spoilers, you might not want to watch the rest of the video. But yeah, without further ado, let's remember Final Fantasy XII. Our story begins in the world of Ivalice, where two countries are embroiled in war, the Empire of Rosaria and the Empire of Arcadia, and caught in the middle of this war lies many kingdoms, including that of Dalmasca. Led by King Ramanus, Dalmasca prepares for battle as the Arcadian Empire heads toward them, conquering every territory in their path. The deciding confrontation would take place on the Dalmascan border at Nalbina Fortress. Participating in this battle is the captain of the guard, Bosch von Ronsenberg, as well as Dalmasca's prince, Lord Rassler. Unfortunately, this skirmish would end in disaster. The Dalmascan forces just can't handle the immense might of the Empire. The fortress is taken, and tragedy strikes as Prince Rassler gets hit by an enemy archer's arrow. This would be a fatal strike. The young prince dies, leaving behind his wife, Princess Ashelia Benargan Dalmasca. Not wanting any more bloodshed, the king agrees to travel to Nalbina to sign a treaty of peace offered by the Imperials. When this news reaches the royal guard, Captain Bosch decides to intercept and evacuate the king before it's too late. But not before he meets a young soldier on the battlefield, a man named Rex.
Is His Majesty unharmed?
He'll agree to an unconditional surrender. They wouldn't dare touch him until the wax on his seal is dry. Quickly, Rex!
Rex separates from the captain and takes the fight to a bunch of Imperials in order to buy Bosch more time. But when Rex catches up, he finds a massacre.
Your Majesty. Captain, why?
The king intended all along to sell Dalmasca to the Empire. His Majesty was a traitor.
Bosch von Ronsenberg, a kingslayer. The Imperials arrive to capture and arrest him, but the damage is done. Dalmasca's leader is dead. When news of Ramanna's death reaches his daughter, Princess Ashe, she succumbs to grief and commits suicide. Dalmasca, with no leadership, no army, and no hope, unconditionally surrenders to the Empire. And with that, we fast forward 2 whole years and join up with our main protagonist, an orphan named Vaan, a boy who's living in the slums of Dalmasca's capital city, Rabanastre. He likes to live dangerously by stealing money from the Imperials that have occupied the city.
The Imperials stole it from us, so it's only fair that we take it back. It's our duty as Dalmascans. Well, wasn't that what you said?
Today, Rabanastre prepares a massive banquet for the Arcadian Empire's consul, son to the Emperor and a man who loves his shampoo and conditioner, Vayne Solidor. He gives a speech to try and win over the Dalmascan people.
King Ramanas loved his people. Together let us embrace the peace His Majesty would surely desire. Achieve but this one thing, and your hatred of me and of the Empire will grieve me not. I will endure your hatred, suffer your slings and arrows. I will defend Dalmasca.
And it kinda works. The citizens warm up to their Imperial conqueror. But this only bothers Vaan more, who decides that tonight's the night to do something ballsy.
Hey, Penel, that fate tonight. You think they'll let us in?
Are you crazy? It's in the palace, and we don't have an invitation if you hadn't noticed. Why the sudden interest, Vaan?
I told you. I'm going to take back what's ours.
Our little Robin Hood uncovers a secret passage to the palace and proceeds to enter during the banquet. And it goes pretty well as Vaan sneaks past all of the guards and even manages to find the royal treasury. But upon picking up a shiny gemstone, he gets interrupted by the real main character.
Quite a performance.
Who are you?
I play the leading man. Who else? Fran, the Magicite.
Now then, I'll take that.
Vaan takes the Magicite and makes a run for it. Just as he gets cornered by these mysterious burglars, the palace gets attacked by a whole bunch of airships. This causes the burglars' getaway bike to crash and for the trio to get trapped in the underground sewer system. It's then that they are revealed to be sky pirates.
Pirates? You're sky pirates? So you have an airship?
It's Balthier. If you ever want to see your home again, you'll do exactly as I say. Myself, Fran, and you, we're working together now. Understood?
When the three attempt to escape the sewers, they end up running into a woman fighting with the Imperials. A woman that happens to be part of a resistance group that's actually responsible for the airship fire. This woman's name is Amalia. She looks familiar. She agrees to join the trio, but it's in vain. The sewer entrance is blocked by the Imperial forces, with even the consul Vane Solidor there to greet them. Our four heroes are now prisoners of the Empire.
You didn't know what he was doing! You have to let him go! You have to!
Penelo! Sorry. That dinner will have to wait.
I told you.
That's enough!
Leave him alone!
Hold on to this for me, would you? Just until I bring Vaughn back.
Everyone but Amalia is transported to Nalbina Fortress. More specifically, the dungeons of the fortress. Unlike a proper prison, this place has very little oversight outside of the entrance, and hoo boy, is it rough for a banga in here. After finishing a scrap in the fight pits, Vaughn and Balthier catch the arrival of a bounty hunter named Bagamnon, someone desperate to claim the bounty on Balthier's head.
By your own words, it was the Imperial Army who caught this sky pirate of yours. We've done your job for you.
Maybe I'll wet my blade on you before I kill Balthier.
That's enough, Bagamnon.
Judge.
Judge?
The self-proclaimed guardians of law and order in Arcadia. They're the elite guard of House Solidor, which effectively makes them the commanders of the Imperial Army.
The Emperor is willing to overlook race for his more talented servants. However, those that do not show respect will receive none in kind.
Your Honor.
We travel freely through our lands because the Emperor wills it.
This charming fellow is Judge Gabranth, and he happens to be everyone's ticket out of the prison as Balthier's partner Fran can actually sense mist coming from the lower levels, an area that only a judge can enter. So they tailed the armored general and actually managed to find their weapons along the way with no guards protecting them whatsoever. Well shit, that was easy. And beyond a magically protected door, Gabranth meets face to face with Dalmasca's traitor.
You have grown very thin, Bosch. Less than a shadow, less than a man. Such a faithful hound to cling so to a fallen kingdom.
Better than throwing it away.
When the Imperials leave the room, Fran confirms that mist is flowing from underneath Bosch's cage.
Please, you must get me out.
It's against my policy to speak with the dead, especially when they happen to be Kingslayers.
I did not kill him.
Is that so? Huh. Glad to hear it.
Vaughn, however, is feeling a little more angry than usual, for now he is in front of Dalmasca's betrayer. Now he's in front of the man who killed his brother. For as it turns out, Vaughn was related to Rex, the young man who was fatally stabbed 2 years ago. Vaughn had to watch as the life drained from his brother day by day until he eventually succumbed to his injuries and passed on. Anger gets the better of our hero, and not wanting to attract the attention of the guards, Fran smashes the chain pulley and everyone hitches a ride down to the bottom. The cage is smashed open, and Bosch von Ronsenberg finds himself free at last. It's then that he explains the truth of what really happened 2 years ago. Judge Gabranth is Bosch's twin brother. He was the one who killed the king and stabbed Rex, while Bosch was helpless to stop him. And the reason for leaving Rex alive to witness this betrayal? So that no one would blame the Empire for the king's assassination. Anywho, Fran's instincts were right, and the mine below Nalbina ends up leading outside. The characters return to Ravenaster, only to find that Miguelo, the shopkeep Vaughn and his friend Penelo work for, is in need of help.
Oh, Vaughn! They've taken Penelo!
Bagamnon noticed that Balthier left Penelo his handkerchief, so they abduct her in order to lure the Sky Pirate into their trap. They tell him to come to the Sky City Bujerba. Vaughn, desperate to save his friend, demands Balthier take him along.
I'll join you.
Huh?
I have some business there as well.
The guards are toying with us.
And so Balthier takes the two men to his airship, the Millennium Falcon. The Straw. Once at Bujerba, they discuss their plans to enter the Bujerba mines when a young man asks to accompany them as he's heading to the same place. And Balthier just goes, okay then. I'm not even kidding, that's how the cutscene plays out. They don't resist the idea at all. It's fucking Kate Sith all over again. This young man calls himself Lamont, although that's not exactly the truth. Still, he is appreciative of the escort as he manages to discover that the Empire has been getting magicite in these mines. Magicite in the 12 universe is able to generate large amounts of magic. It's then that Begamnon makes himself known, revealing that after they saw Balthier enter the mine, they cut Penelo loose and let her run away. Since the dude has a big fuck-off chainsaw, the party decides to run away too. Run away! Run away! Run away! Lamont, being a speedy little guy, manages to reach the exit first, where Penelo and a group of Imperials await at the entrance.
I see you've been out walking without the company of your cortege, Lord Larsa. We caught her wandering out of the mines.
Marquis, I trust that your estate can accommodate another guest.
Why not?
Larsa Ferinas Solidor, fourth son to Emperor Gramis and brother to Vane.
What?
Our purposes lead the same way. To Ondor.
So after a bit of arranging, Bosch manages to secure an audience with the Marquis, Halim Ondor. Hearing that he's secretly a supporter of the Resistance, Bosch comes to him hoping that he can pull some strings and rescue one of the Empire's prisoners. That prisoner being Amalia. Unfortunately,
summon the guard!
It's a trap, and our heroes find themselves captured by the Empire again, this time brought to their dreadnought airship, the Leviathan. And once on board, Bosch finds the woman he's been looking for.
Majesty.
After what you've done, how dare you? You're supposed to be dead.
This is hardly the courtesy due the late Princess Ashalia Benargin Dalmasca.
Princess?
Since she's leading the Resistance and refusing to cooperate, the Empire plans to kill her and everyone else. But lucky for them, the Marquis was always on their side, as this was all but a gambit to get everyone on board. Bosch's old comrade Vossler was always undercover, ready to free them. So after a tough fight through the airship, they not only rescue the princess, but also end up running into Larsa Solidor, who's been keeping Penelo safe the entire time.
We must reach the airships before they do.
You would let us leave knowing who we are.
That you and Captain Ronsenberg were made to appear dead is like a hidden thread laid bare. Your actions hereafter will pull at that thread, and we will see what it unravels. I believe 'tis for the good of Dalmasca, and the good of the Empire.
And so they managed to steal an Imperial aircraft and escape without anyone noticing. Later that night, they return to Marquis Ondor's estate, where Ash explains that she never tried to contact Ondor earlier because he was the one who declared her dead by suicide, a plan concocted by Vane to drive a wedge between the two. Ash asks for Bujerba's aid in fighting the Empire, but Ondor explains that without proper proof of her heritage, there is no way he can lend any kind of aid. But Ash does know of one way, and this requires stealing the Strahl.
I'm going to retrieve the Dawn Shard. It's the proof that I need. I know where it's hidden. I'll return his airship later.
Are you crazy?
Trust me, you're better off staying here.
Suppose you kidnapped me instead.
What do you have that I would want?
The Dynast King's treasure. The Dawn Shard is but one of the riches that lie waiting in King Wraithwall's tomb.
King Wraithwall, you say?
Kidnapping royalty is a serious offense. It won't do much to lower the bounty on your head.
How much is the price on your head these days, I wonder?
Will you be joining us?
I don't want to stick around this place.
Then I'm coming too.
Penelo?
Don't leave me here.
Of course not.
Then it's settled.
And so the party is assembled. Everyone joins forces to escort Ash to King Wraithwall's tomb in the hopes of finding proof of her heritage with the Dawn Shard. And that's the setup for the grand adventure that is Final Fantasy XII. I apologize for the long exposition, but the first 7 hours of the game are really busy, and there were still plenty of details I left out that I'll probably come back to. As you probably noticed from the cutscenes I showed you, Final Fantasy XII is mighty impressive. Not only is the voice acting, camera work, and writing really top-notch, it also looks leagues better than Final Fantasy X. Coming out at the tail end of the PlayStation 2's lifespan, this game pushes everything to the limit. You start walking around the streets of Rabanastre, and you just notice so many details. All of the people that occupy the area. Just going through the shopping bazaar can feel overwhelming because of how many NPCs you're passing by. These cities are so alive. You go into an item shop, and instead of seeing like maybe one customer and the clerk at their desk, you could find over 7 people to talk to. The shops are filled with display cases and trinkets, and I promise you're never going to see the same place twice. There's so much going on. And even when you're navigating places for the first time, you might need to consult a map just looking for some armor to buy. Rabanastre alone has like a shopping district, an airport, the underground slums, and this city is actually surrounded by 3 different locations that you can enter from the west, east, or south. And it's not just humans who live here, as you'll see a whole bunch of different races, from the lizard-type people known as Bangas to the big burly boar people we call Sikhs. We've already been introduced to Fran, and she's a member of the Vieira race. Big, tall bunny women who are really in tune with mystical energies. They also live in the trees, because they can communicate with them. They also wear very little clothing, which I think someone at Square is really proud of. I actually downloaded the free Zodiac Age theme for my PlayStation 4, and the image is basically ass! Just lots of brown bunny girl ass. Look, I don't want to suggest someone at Square Enix has a fetish, but I think it's interesting that both Ash and Pinello have CG renders where their behinds are aimed at the camera. I mean, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. And we also have Moogles wandering around, but this is definitely the most different they've ever looked. They actually look like bunnies themselves. Probably the most realistic take on their species yet, which fits Ivalice since the universe is so grounded. Which reminds me, the only character from the other Ivalice games you'll see in 12 is Montblanc the Moogle, a character from the Tactics Advance games. So if you're expecting to see Ramza or Delita or anyone else, 12 only focuses specifically on the Dalmascan territories. Imagine that, a numbered Final Fantasy game where you only explore one continent and not the entire world. But there's lots of variety on this continent. Snowy mountains, humid jungles, the desert, the wetlands, tropical beaches, ancient temples. Dalmasca is still packed with so much to see. Such a fully realized world, and with so much to fight. The game's pretty, but we gotta talk about the meat and potatoes now because Final Fantasy XII changes things up quite a bit, and there is a lot to cover. So yeah, the first thing to mention is that there are no battle transitions. When you go into a field of monsters, a dungeon, whatever, your characters will just be walking around like they do in towns. But now, you can see your enemies walking around too. If you want, you can run right up to the wolves and slash their faces off, or you can completely go around them and skip the fight altogether. And some people hearing that right now are probably thinking, there are no random encounters. This is a subject I didn't talk much about in the retrospective, unless I thought the encounter rate was trash. From 1 to 10, the game would always have you walking around when suddenly, you get thrust into a fight with enemies. And that's actually a big deterrent for some people. Constantly having your movement taken away to engage with enemies as a gameplay mechanic was being criticized more and more as the years went on. People would play a Mario RPG and be wondering, hey, why can't I do this in every RPG? I personally don't mind random encounters, but I know that I'm in the minority. Starting here, Final Fantasy lets you see your enemies coming. When you engage enemies, you don't cut to a special battle arena. If you walk up to an enemy and select attack, the character will keep attacking until the monster is dead. You don't need to select attack multiple times. Once you engage, everything is automatic. There's no loading screens to wait for, and no victory poses for winning. There are no fancy camera angles, you're in control of the camera the entire time. When you kill one group of monsters, you can immediately keep moving and fight the next group of monsters. There are no interruptions. The game still uses the active time battle system, so you still see gauges fill up, but you're never waiting for another enemy's move to finish. Sometimes you and your enemy will hit each other at the exact same time, and the flow just keeps on going. And then there's how the party acts on its own. During the game, you're only ever in charge of one primary character. You can move around with the control stick, you can select that character's commands, but the other two party members are going to be using AI and acting independently. It's a way of keeping the battles moving without you having to constantly stop and manually input the commands of all three characters. Although, you can do that if you really want to. At any point during a battle, you can switch which characters you're in control of. You can tell your teammates to do one specific command. You can even meticulously control what your party will do the entire time with the newly introduced Gambit System. And I actually have a lot to say about the Gambit System, so I'm going to come back to this later. The places you fight monsters in are vast and gigantic. No more of the linear pathways that you would see in Final Fantasy X. You'll open up the map of any given area, and it seems like there are 4 or 5 big open fields with secrets and hidden monsters just waiting to be found by the player. Ivalice is here to be explored. But you gotta be careful you don't put yourself in danger. If you don't pay attention to the level of the monsters you're approaching, you can get curb stomped real quick. The beginning area telegraphs this really well. You start off in the Dalmasca Ester Sand, where you're likely to only see some wolves and some tiny cactuses. But in the middle of this field is a big, giant T-Rex. It's so big compared to everything else that it makes it clear that this guy's special. Sure enough, it's a much higher level and will murder you at the beginning of the game. But that being said, not every high-level enemy is obvious, and even in this very playthrough, I got caught off guard in the Giza Plains. I didn't think anything of the new enemy type I had stumbled across, and I paid the price for it. Ugh. Compared to the previous games in the series, this is a very different beast. Everyone always made the comparison that it feels like a single-player MMO. I've always felt that Final Fantasy was just taking inspiration from a lot of Western RPGs at the time. Playing through this game reminded me of something I had played 2 years earlier, and that was Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Because that was another game where you went around big open spaces with a party of 3, engaged with enemies you could see on the map, while characters would auto-attack and do their own thing until you gave specific commands. Hell, the game even had Pinello in it. I'm not even kidding.
I never knew my parents. My brother always looked out for me. He's the one who brought me here to Tars. I was just a kid, only 5.
And I love KOTOR! That's a game I must have played a dozen times. I love it to death. So if Final Fantasy XII feels like KOTOR, why didn't I go back to it? There's just a lot of things I felt Star Wars did so much better. For example, the traps. Usually when you go through dungeons and stuff, there are going to be a few traps lying around, which you definitely want to avoid. They can damage you, they can poison you, they can blind you, slow you down, cover you in oil. It's random what it does, but it's always a pain whenever you walk over one. And the worst part is that they're always invisible. If you do not have a bangle equipped, which automatically gives your character the Libra status, you can't see them. You'll just be walking and boom! Big explosion out of nowhere. It's so frustrating that I have to waste an accessory slot just so I can avoid them. And if I don't want to do that, the only way to avoid traps is to cast Float on myself for every single area of every single dungeon. And needing to constantly cast Float is also a waste of a Gambit. It's just annoying. In KOTOR, all you needed were high stats in awareness and demolition. As long as awareness was high, you could see traps without an accessory. Not only that, but you could disarm them to eliminate them from the area. Heck, you could take the trap and use it yourself for a future battle. In 12, they respawn even after you trigger them, and they never go away, and you never get your own, and it just makes dungeon crawling annoying. Especially when you enter a new area and they just fucking place a trap right in front of the door. These things can kill you! KOTOR just handled it so much better. It was just smart to use your character growth in that way. And on that subject, now it's time to talk about the license board. So anytime you kill an enemy, it usually drops about 1 or 2 license points, or LP for short. And these points are used to unlock licenses that grant your characters the ability to use magic, accessories, weapons, or armor. And I stress, the ability to use them. In Final Fantasy X, the Sphere Grid would actually unlock abilities so that you could cast Thundara whenever you wanted. But in 12, unlocking Thundara doesn't give you the power, it merely makes it so that when you do get the spell, you can use it. If you find a new weapon shop and buy a stronger weapon, you can't use it unless you have the license for it. It's basically a permission slip. And there were a lot of fans who took this concept literally and thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. What, is some judge gonna appear in the middle of the wilderness to be like, "Hey, you don't have a license for that bow and arrow, you're under arrest"? Good lord, it's just a video game mechanic. It's a way of encouraging you to build your characters a certain way, so that you don't have to grind for LP. If you commit to giving someone a bow staff, you won't need to waste points on swords. Everyone can learn anything. There's no weapon, no magic, no armor that they can't potentially use. I tried to give my 3 characters certain roles. For Vaughn, I made him the tank. Ash was the mage, with magic, mystical armor, and a bow and arrow to stay away from enemies. And with Balthier, I made him a jack of all trades. Light armor, one-handed swords, and some magic proficiency. And to save me some grind, I stuck with that setup. Although, getting license points is still easy to exploit, as the very first enemies you fight will drop the same amount of LP as the monsters in the end dungeons. But the game still has a traditional level up system though, so you can't raise your stats just by taking on low-level enemies. And you know, this game actually lets you switch out party members like Final Fantasy X. If you want, you can pull Vaughn and replace him with Bosch at any point during the fight. In fact, you can't get a game over until all 6 characters are dead. So in a way, you have a bigger party than usual, but I never use them, honestly. Because you know what's strange? When you kill one enemy, everyone gets license points. If Vaughn by himself kills a wolf, then Pinello, Bosch, Fran, they all get 1 license point. And good! I'm happy with that. It's just too bad this isn't consistent with experience. When you aren't using characters, they don't level up, which means their stats suck. They'll always be lesser than the characters you have been using, and I don't want to spend extra time just to keep everyone balanced, so I never used them. It's not like they had unique exclusive abilities, nor is it a struggle to beat the game without them. So yeah. But still, you know what game got this right? KOTOR. Because in Star Wars, every character you don't use gets experience points anyway. It encouraged you to switch out characters often because you never lost anything. Why is Final Fantasy VII still the only game that got this right? If a game's gonna be grindy, other characters should level up with you. But I'll talk about this game's grindiness later. For now, let's return to the story. So Ash and her companions cross the vast sand sea and eventually arrive at the Tomb of Wraithwall, the tomb of her ancestor, the legendary Dynast King. Inside, they have to solve some puzzles and even go face to face with an Esper named Belias. Which, okay, it's a minor thing and I don't want to nitpick this game to death, but as a kid I remember being so disappointed that the summons of the games were called Espers. That's a Final Fantasy VI term! Every game had their own moniker. Guardian Forces, Eidolons, Aeons, Avatars. Then this game is like, hey, we're just gonna call them Espers again. And I know, it doesn't matter, but still. But inside the main chamber, they manage to find it. The Dawn Shard. But when Ash claims the stone for herself, she sees a familiar face as her late husband, Lord Rassler, actually manages to materialize right in front of her. A specter that only she can see. He says nothing, and just walks away. But still, mission accomplished. Unfortunately, as soon as they leave the tomb, the Empire arrives in droves to capture our heroes for the 3rd time. And it's then that the true nature of the Dawn Shard is revealed.
We seek Wraithwall's legacy, the ancient relics of the Dynast King. They affected Nethicite.
He speaks of the Dawn Shard. That is the Nethicite.
Nethicite is way more potent than regular Magicite. And with its power at the Empire's command, there's nothing they can't do. But when they start trying to test how potent it is, things go incredibly wrong.
Fran? Such heat! The mist, it's burning!
What is this? Something's wrong!
I always knew Fran didn't take well to being tied up. I just never knew how much. How about you?
I like Fran's idea. Let's get out of here.
So our heroes secure another ship, and they barely manage to escape as the Dawn Shard overloads and lets out a giant burst of energy that takes out the entire fleet of airships. One little stone, capable of that much destruction. Later, Bosch comes to a realization that Nethicite may also have been responsible for a similar incident years ago when the city of Nabudis was destroyed by a giant magical blast. And at the time, a relic of King Wraithwall happened to be there. The Midlight Shard. So basically, if the Empire managed to get any of that Nethicite, they'll have the equivalent of nuclear weapons. Yay!
Dangerous though it be, what we need now is power. Should we declare Dalmasca free without the means to defend our claim, the Empire would crush us. This Nethicite I hold must be my sword. I will avenge those who have died, and the Empire will know remorse.
So it's at this point in the story that the proper adventure begins and the plot kinda slows down. The 6 characters go on a journey to learn more about the Dawn Shard they possess, as well as find a way to use that power against the Empire. And that involves traveling across Ivalice. Why aren't they flying around in Balthier's airship? Oh, well, when the Leviathan blew up, it damaged the Strahl because it was nearby. I guess. Hey, it's an RPG, what do you want? They run into familiar faces like Larsa Solidor, and some new ones like Redis the Pirate, all while occasionally scrapping with the Empire as they try to find a means to destroy them. So I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about the characters themselves. And yes, I have seen Star Wars! What with its teenage youth who yearns for adventure, driven by death in the family to take the fight to the Empire. The old warrior long thought dead, the cocky rogue who has his own ship, his co-pilot of a different race which lives in the trees, the green bounty hunter that's chasing them, the princess who leads the rebellion, and the evil armored man who serves the Emperor despite having relations in the Resistance. Yeah. Look, Final Fantasy has always loved its Star Wars. There have been plenty of references throughout the series, so I don't know what to tell you. It seems they borrowed some ideas. It's not one-to-one the same story. This is way more politically driven, there's no force, but hey, the comparisons will still be made, so I had to point it out. So what can I say about the characters? Well, there's Vaughn's girlfriend Penelo, who is poor and nice and an orphan. And yeah, that's about it. There's Bosch von Ronsenberg, who is incredibly loyal to Dalmasca, and yet isn't really searching for revenge over what happened to him.
After Vane's ruse, I had abandoned hope for honor. Yet, never did I forget my knightly vows. If I could protect but one person from war's horror, then I would bear any shame. I would bear it proudly.
All he wants is peace, for Dalmasca to be free again. Balthier's partner Fran is really mysterious. A Viera who chooses to pal around as a sky pirate, what does she want from life? And honestly, she spends most of the time in the background until she has to serve as the guide for all things magic. But at some point in the story, the crew can't progress through the jungle because of a mystical barrier, so they have to stop in Yurit Village, the home of the Viera. Fran left this village and her 2 sisters behind, choosing instead to live in society. And for doing so, Fran lost her connection to the wood, the voice of the trees. When she returns, her sister Mjörn, overjoyed to see Fran again, wants to leave the forest as well.
Do not do this. You must remain away from the Humes. I won my freedom. Yet my past has been cut away forever. Is solitude you want, Mjörn?
Sister.
No, Mjörn. Only one sister remains to you now. You must forget my existence.
The wood longs for you, for the child gone from under her boughs.
A pleasant lie, that.
I really like this game's dialogue. I love the psychology of the characters, and part of me was so intrigued as to why Fran felt this way. Does she regret leaving the wood? If so, why not come back home to live with her family? I just wanted more exploration on these ideas. This is Fran's best scene, but the game doesn't deliver on it. She becomes a background character from here on out, and then you start to forget these moments. But I know what character you want me to talk about next. The main character of the story, Vaughn. Oh boy, this kid's controversial. Okay, so I'll say right off the bat, I was disappointed back in 2004, 2005 because I found it so tired that another teenage blonde kid was going to be the main hero. After Cloud and Zidane and Titus, it's like, could we shake it up a little bit here? He was just such a standard protagonist, you know? We start the game with this character. He's our avatar whenever we enter a town, and he triggers the plot by entering the palace, getting everyone captured, and yada yada yada. But beyond that, he really has nothing to do with anything that's going on. I always felt Fran asked if they were coming along simply because they were skilled at combat. And no, I don't know how 2 orphans living in the slums learned how to fight just as good as the captain of the guard, but it's a video game, what do you want? People hate Vaughn because he doesn't drive the plot. He doesn't shake things up like Titus does, he isn't secretly related to the villain, or half Esper, or whatever. He really is just a street rat.
Hey, I'm just along for the ride.
But he's still presented as the main character because so many scenes are from his perspective, and he always feels the need to inject himself into matters that frankly he has no business doing so.
Just do us a favor and stay out of our way. We'll find her ourselves.
This is my charge.
That's our charge, actually.
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
I'm not against Vaughn on principle. I think it's a good idea to have him and Penelo in the group. They're the common folk, the poor people being oppressed by the Empire, the ones losing their families to war. It's good to have them communicating with Bosch and Ash to relate their stories and help them understand Dalmasca's situation. He's just a kid who yearns for more, to leave his grim situation behind, to have his own ship, to be a sky pirate. I don't think he's particularly badly written, nor is he a shallow one-dimensional character. He just isn't main character material, and that bothers people. Also, his abs are weird. It looks like he just smudged dirt on his belly to make it look like he had abs. The Zodiac Age fixes this and he looks a lot better, but yeah. For me, the real main character is Princess Ash, and rightfully so. Everything revolves around her. The quest they're on, the trinkets they're searching for, and the people who are trying to guide and use her. If there's a main theme I think Final Fantasy XII is about, it would be revenge. Whether it's between the two twin brothers, a son and his father, or the impoverished citizens who are being oppressed. But Ash is a would-be world leader, and her decisions going forward will dramatically change the face of Ivalice forever. I really appreciate that Ash wasn't just another demure, kind, selfless woman like so many characters before her. Don't get me wrong, I like Yuna, I like Garnet, I like Aerith and Terra, and so many more. But I was so happy that Ash not only wanted Dalmasca's independence back, but she also wanted Arcadia to burn to the fucking ground. And this presents a problem when they get to know Larsa Solidor, because he's a good man who disagrees with his brother Vayne, and all he wants is peace.
Neither of our countries can afford this now. The Rosarian Empire would stir. They would aid the resistance and use this aid as a pretext to declare war on Arcadia. And Arcadia would have no choice but to answer.
How dare you say that? The Empire attacked us, stole all we hold dear, and you would have me save them from war?
Dalmasca would be the battlefield. What if Nethicite were used on Rabanasta? You know my brother would do this.
My god, I love the dialogue. That is good conflict right there. Ash lost everything. Her father, her husband, her entire kingdom. She's been stewing in her hate of the Empire for 2 whole years. She wants peace, but she also wants justice. But there are consequences with these thoughts, and it's never that simple. At one point, the characters have to travel to Bur Omasace, which is a haven for refugees that have had to flee their war-torn homes because of the Empire. And it just shows you the cost of war, how people's lives are thrown into disarray because of certain leaders' actions. Arcadia has good people. People who don't like Vayne Solidor. People who are struggling to live just as much as the people of Dalmasca. Should they be punished as well?
The choice is yours to make. But don't give your heart to a stone. You're too strong for that, princess.
I pray you're right, Balthier.
Ash's struggle is about letting go of her revenge, to swallow her pride for the greater good. And that's captivating storytelling. It's what I've always loved about Yasumi Matsuno's previous games, because he's always been so good at character-driven drama, so good at political intrigue. He brings some really unique storytelling to the Final Fantasy franchise. Although I am aware that this game went through development hell and he actually left the project in 2005, but he is still credited for the story, and it still kind of feels like his work. Either way, it's great stuff regardless. Now that being said, I can understand why someone wouldn't like this story. Vaughn being the main character aside, the game has endless conversations about how the war is going, who agrees with who, and yet it doesn't have any special moments. Like, when I think about Final Fantasy, I can picture Cecil becoming a paladin. I think of Squall running away from the robot spider. I think of Titus and Yuna in Macalania Forest. Celeste in the World of Ruin. I could go on and on and on. It's a series that is enhanced by mind-blowing action, crazy plot twists, heart-tugging romance. But when I think of Final Fantasy XII, they talk, they find some trinkets, they talk some more, and then the final boss happens. Yeah, There are lots of meanwhile scenes. And what I mean by that is that while Ash and her companions are traveling the world to get to where they need to go, the game will constantly cut back to Arcadia to let us know how the Empire is doing. Scenes of the Emperor talking to Judge Gabranth, scenes of the Arcadian Senate discussing who should lead the Empire, the judges discussing which Solidor they support, Vayne discussing his plans with the Empire's head magicite researcher, a man named Sid. And the party isn't there for any of this. It's all just to flesh out Gabranth, Larsa, and Vayne's characters so that we understand how we get the happy ending when we reach the finale. There's just so much information they throw at you in this 60 to 100 hour game that if you're not paying attention or if you forget certain things, some of the developments come out of nowhere and you get so confused about how we got here. This game doesn't let you rewatch cutscenes and there's no plot synopsis. So if you forget Gabranth's backstory when they talk about it for 30 seconds in Hour 8, it's all going to seem underdeveloped and sudden when Bosch and Gabranth are yelling at each other about it at the end of the game. This game's rated T for teen, but it seems to be aiming for a much older audience. Because when I was younger, I found some of these scenes boring as hell. Just lots of cutscenes of people standing around talking about politics. Today, though, I appreciate them a lot more. The scene where Judge Gabranth is forced to kill another fellow judge is so powerful and so well directed. And yet, before this retrospective, I didn't even remember that this scene existed. 12's storytelling is very slow-paced, very subtle, almost no comic relief. If you're expecting the goofy energy of Final Fantasy X, you're just not gonna get it. Unfortunately, the voice acting is good, so there's just nothing to laugh at. It's so weird playing a 2006 PlayStation 2 game, and yet hearing so many actors who are still working today. A pre-Uncharted Nolan North did the voice of Vossler.
Your cage may have no bars, but it is a cage. The eyes of the Resistance watch unblinking.
Yuri Lowenthal as Rex, John DiMaggio as Miguelo, Phil Lamar as Redis, Kat Tabor as Pinello, Kari Walgren as Princess Ash, and I can't not mention Gideon Emery as Balthier because holy moly, that voice.
Straight to the point, aren't we? I like that.
Just top-notch actors. Some other good listening is the music. The composer for this game is Hitoshi Sakamoto, whose work includes the Tactics Ogre series as well as the other Ivalice Final Fantasy games. And he definitely had some big shoes to fill. I wouldn't expect him to replicate what Nobuo did with the earlier titles, and while this isn't one of my top 5 favorite soundtracks ever or anything, I still really enjoy it. It suffers a little because the instrumentation sounds cheap, but I think the melodies really stick with you in the long run. So I'm going to talk about the gameplay again. And before I really start digging into this thing, I'd like to start by talking about the things I like most. In terms of content, Final Fantasy XII is the biggest and best game in the series, and I do not say that lightly. Even ignoring how big the mandatory areas are compared to previous games, Ivalice is just filled with side quests and optional areas galore. If you want to ignore the main quest, you can find a ton of secrets in the Rabanaster sewers. You can find the dead city of Nabudis. You can actually return to older dungeons and discover entirely new sections with much harder enemies and better loot to find. By playing through the game, you'll encounter 5 mandatory espers who, after being defeated, can be summoned by you to help with battles. But there are 8 optional espers, which makes 13 in total. That's a lot of summons to find. This time around, they're not represented by the usual crew. No Ifrit, no Shiva, Bahamut, nothing. Instead, we get a whole bunch of ghastly demonic gods who were punished for disobeying the heavens. And I noticed that a lot of these espers are actually previous Final Fantasy villains. One esper is Chaos, the final boss of Final Fantasy I. Another is Zeromus, the final boss of FF4. Then you have another one called Mateus, which I never mentioned is the name of the Emperor in Final Fantasy II, at least in the Japanese novelization. Even Mateus's bio explains that he was sent to Hell to be imprisoned for all eternity. As a guy who's played each game in the series, these kind of things really tickle me. Now, Final Fantasy XII doesn't have a card game, nor does it have Blitzball, but what it does have are postings in taverns from people desperate for help. And this is where the hunts come in. If you want to take a break from the main story, you can always go back to any previous location thanks to the fast travel system that's part of the orange save crystals. Even if you go far into Arcadian territory, you can always return to Rabanaster in no time at all. And at the taverns, you can accept postings on the hunt board warning of a deadly monster that needs to be taken out. Not only will you be rewarded with items and cash, you'll be going up against some tough customers who may be really easy or really hard depending on how much you've leveled up. But eventually it won't matter, as some of the hunts end up being the toughest super bosses in the game. The hunts are going to take you a long time. Not only are there 45 marks to vanquish throughout the game, but they aren't all just waiting for you to show up and kill it. Many of the beasts require a little problem solving before you can do anything. For example, there's an Adamantoise in Giza Plains, right? It's in an area you can't reach because the place is flooded and there's no way to walk over there. So the solution is to go all over the plains and cut down a whole bunch of dead trees. The branches eventually drift to the same spot and create a bridge for you to cross. Some monsters won't come out until the weather suits them, and that's another neat detail too. The weather will change and be different when you revisit places. Sometimes it's raining in the Cerobi Steppe, sometimes it's sunny. Sometimes there's a blizzard in the Paramina Rift. Sometimes there's a sandstorm in the Ester Sand. I've never seen the weather change in Final Fantasy before, so I thought that was neat. Some of the hunts are my absolute favorite boss fights in the whole entire game. I think by the end, when you've reached the final area, you have the best weapons and armor, you buy the best magic spells, when I have all the techniques and tools at my disposal, fighting bosses feels good. The battle structure might be different, but it is still absolutely Final Fantasy. You have Protect, Shell, Haste, you get poisoned, turned to stone, blinded. It absolutely still has so many of the familiar elements of the series. Setting up buffs, debuffing the enemy, lowering their physical defense, and just wailing on them. That's the kind of stuff that sets my endorphins off, you know? I like that there are fun surprises with the hunts. Like, you might finish the main story and then start wondering to yourself, what the hell happened to Bagamnon? Because he never shows up again. And that's because his storyline gets resolved when he posts a fake hunt to lure Balthier and company out, and then you have to fight the guy and his crew. This genuinely caught me off guard when it happened. Now, of course, I have to talk about the best hunt in the game. So at one point, you accept a build that is requested by a warrior whose sword was stolen from him. He knows that the thief is actually hiding out in the Luju mines on top of a big bridge. I think you know what's coming.
Fools, you face the mightier swordsman in all Ivalice. You face me, Gilgamesh!
Fucking Gilgamesh! And the fun thing about battling him and his dog companion Enkidu is that he keeps pulling out new swords to buff himself. Swords like Squall's Gunblade, Cloud's Buster Sword, Titus's Brotherhood, and then he pulls out a doozy of a reference, which thanks to Smash Brothers, you might recognize.
Quake, mortals! You face the Blade of Legend!
That is Erdrick's sword from the Dragon Quest series. Or rather, a fake version much like Excalibur. Just amazing. There's a lot to like about Final Fantasy XII. The cutscenes are incredible, the music is fun, the game is packed with details, and there's so much content. So what's the problem? How come I didn't love this as a kid? Why does this game seem so overlooked? It sold really well in North America, so it should be pretty popular. For me, the game just isn't that fun to play. When I finished collecting footage for this title, I had remembered every single problem that I had back in 2007. Reasons why I'm probably not going to rush to replay this again anytime soon. So let's start by talking about the Gambit System. Like I said, your party is going to be acting independently from you and doing their own thing. And when it starts off, they only have like 1 or 2 gambits. One telling them to auto-attack any enemy that approaches them, or another to heal a teammate if their health gets too low. Which is helpful. Saves me time having to activate attack for every single character. KOTOR does it too, so that's not an issue. But gambits, as you discover, are very important to the game's design. It has its own tab in the main menu. There are gambit shops in every single town where you can buy specific commands to direct your team. And it is thorough. I'm not kidding, this might be the best AI direction I've ever seen in a video game. You can set parameters, where your friend only heals people if they're below 60% health, or lower than 40% health, at 10% health. You can set it to be Cure, Cura, Curaga, a high potion, whatever you want. If someone gets afflicted by a status ailment, you can program a gambit so that your teammates instantly cure it. Remember that this game is constantly moving, that you control the camera, and sometimes you can't be looking at everything. I don't want my eyes to be glued to the action text just to see if the enemy is flinging poison at me from behind my back. If someone gets blinded and I didn't know it happened, I'll miss a few attacks before I clue in. The icons at the names are okay, but they aren't stealing my attention, you know? When I get killed by an enemy, I can have a teammate instantly throw a phoenix down on me the second I fall. And sure, I could not use that kind of gambit and instead do it manually. But me selecting a character, scrolling through their menus, highlighting the phoenix down item, and casting it on my KO'd teammate will be a much slower process if I do. The faster I can take care of problems, the faster I can take the fight to the enemy. The problem is, once I've set up all the gambits I could want to fix every bad situation that could hit me, I'm not really playing the game anymore. Seriously, I am walking in the direction of enemies, and the game is doing all the work. They attack, they heal when they're hurt, and because MP restores itself when you run around places, I don't feel the need to use restorative items all that much. I'm efficient at the game, but I'm bored going through it. And again, I know. I don't have to use the gambits. They are optional. Most people will tell me that I should only have a gambit for attacking, and that's it. But I think this game's pacing is actually pretty terrible, and trying to play it without gambits is slow and tedious. Like, do you know how boring it is to be a thief in this game? You are going to encounter at least 50 or 70 enemies anytime you go to a new area. Having to manually go into the Technics menu to activate Steal on each individual thing would drive me crazy after a while. And you're gonna want to do that for every enemy you come across because, believe me, you need the extra loot to make money quicker in shops. 12 is big. Too big if you're trying to play it like the older Final Fantasies. Because most of the time in the last few games, you would spend like an hour or less going through a dungeon. You'd probably only participate in 7 to 15 battles and have enough time to see a cutscene between characters. The series really has great pacing most of the time. It never feels like you're in a place for far too long. But Final Fantasy XII is different. I knew I was in trouble when I reached the Ogre Yensa Sand Sea. It's basically a big sand ocean where you're constantly walking along these ring-shaped oil rigs. This area, if you're trying to explore all of it and find all the treasure chests and stuff, goes on for 2 whole hours. And again, let's pretend that the only gambit I'm using is attack. It's 2 whole hours of moving forward, walking along the same dull oil rigs, and mowing down easy-to-kill Jawas. Sorry, sometimes you'll kill chickens or fish, but all you need to do is attack because there's nothing to the combat. I wasn't being challenged by the enemies, so I was just constantly moving forward for 2 whole hours, and eventually I decided to put on a YouTube video because I was bored. If I was getting hurt at the Sand Sea, it's because my idiot teammates ran into the traps. God damn it, Vossler! It wouldn't have taken me so long if I had known the treasure chests were gonna suck. 99% of the time, they have nothing worthwhile. Seriously, I go all over these maps, I look in every nook and cranny, and the most I ever get is a paltry amount of gil. Wow! A whopping 22 gil? Awesome! I get to eat at McDonald's tonight! I shouldn't complain, it's better than the usual junk. Ooh, a knot of rust! A knot of rust! A knot of rust! There are good treasures to be found, but this game uses a randomly generated system that respawns chests and randomly decides what it gives you. I will always prefer scripted treasure to random treasure. Now, not every area is as long as the Sand Sea, but the gameplay rarely changes. The automation of the Gambit system makes the grind feel uninteresting. And yes, Final Fantasy XII is grindy. I can't skip out on fighting enemies. If you want enough license points to be able to use stuff, if you want gil in order to buy better weapons and armor, you gotta kill everything you see. Heck, even just the act of collecting loot this time around, instead of monsters simply dropping gil, is just another way the game stretches things out. There's no crafting system or anything, so all of these items have no other purpose but to be sold in a shop. So every time you go into town, you have to laboriously sell each item individually because the game doesn't have a sell-all option. Not that it would help, because they put teleport stones in the loot section for some reason, even though I need those to fast travel with the crystals. To me, there's a certain irony about the game streamlining battles. Everything's faster, and yet you spend way more time battling than you ever have before. You want to know how long the final dungeon of the game is? The Pharaoh's Tower is, I kid you not, 3 hours long. Going from start to finish took me 3 recording sessions. Sure, there were save crystals scattered throughout, and there was an occasionally fun boss fight, but man, you would be going through giant hallways with nothing in them. Every floor looked identical, and the longer it went on, the more frustrated I became. When I reached hour 2, I was so sure it was over. I was like, this has to be it. This has to. But no, it just kept going. When I played through this dungeon, I died a little inside. The Pharaoh's Tower is officially worse than the Crystal Tower from Final Fantasy III. Being one of the last things before the end of the game, it leaves you with this bitter feeling. It turns what was up to that point an okay game into a frustrating one. And I think that's why I was so hesitant to replay this. I mean, I've already said that I'm not in love with the battles and Gambit system, but I didn't hate the majority of the adventure. It was mindless, but I was still addicted to growing my characters, and the cutscenes were pulling me along the entire time. I wanted to see where this was going. And again, I did enjoy the boss fights, because that's when things seemed to come alive. The music got intense and the damage was higher, so I actually had to buff my characters. One thing I love is that bosses have their own special moves, and when they activate them, the action stops and we get to see them do something really cool and cinematic. Something worthy of the spectacle that Final Fantasy always used to deliver. I don't think the bosses are like some of the best in the series or anything, but these fights were some of the few times that Final Fantasy XII seemed to have a pulse, you know? I'm so conflicted about the post-game content. On one hand, battling some of the harder extra bosses was some of the best moments in the game. On the other hand, getting to these battles was such a pain in the ass. For example, there's the Behemoth King. It's one of the tougher hunts, and it really tests you with how hard it hits and how many barriers it puts up to make you switch your tactics every now and then. But, in order for the Behemoth King to show up, you have to go to the Feywood's 2 biggest fields and clear out every single monster in there. And again, these are gigantic fields with a fog obscuring your vision, where if you miss one tiny snake in this big lawn football field, the Behemoth King won't show up and the enemies will respawn and you'll have to clear them all out all over again. It's so slow and terrible. Ugh. The Shadow Seer's a fun fight. It's basically a boss gauntlet where this shadowy wizard calls out a whole bunch of super beasts, and the fight really tests your endurance. Too bad in order to reach him, you have to go through 3 floors of the Pharaoh's Tower basement, where you have to collect black orbs from monsters to put them in this pedestal, but if you put in too many, you'll reset the counter and have to collect more, and fuck this, it goes on forever! The hunts are fun, but man, having to do all this backtracking, constantly going from place to place, interacting with all these different petitioners that you have to meet in order to start the hunt, and then go back to after you finish the hunt, it's just such a slow process that should be so much quicker and simpler. There's the Summon Kachu lane. He has this magic field that drains your health, but he also tries poisoning you, so you have to kill him quick. But in order to get to him, you gotta fiddle around with 8 sluice gates to make the water run a certain way so you can reach switches to make an entrance for his chamber, and ugh. The gates open and close slowly. You're constantly doing trial and error just to see how the water is affecting things, and it's so slow and painful. I just wish the bonus dungeons didn't suck. Like, I personally think Pharaoh's Tower was the worst of it, but when I vented about how bad that dungeon was on Twitter, I had people saying that they hated the Great Crystal more. Well, heck, you're not wrong! Ugh, just an endless series of circular rooms with no identifiers where you're constantly teleporting around. And when you try to pull up the map, you don't get a map! Thanks! Going through it once was bad enough, but if you want the Esper Ultima, you have to go through it twice. No Esper is worth this. And that's actually true because Espers suck in Final Fantasy XII. Like, the summoner calls out the Esper, right? And it basically replaces the other 2 party members and becomes an AI buddy that fights alongside you. The problem being, they aren't that strong, you can't direct their commands, and if the summoner gets killed really quickly, the Esper goes away with them. And then you've wasted all of your MP for nothing. See, in order to summon, you need mischarges, and the only way to get those is to unlock quickenings on the license board. And quickenings are basically this game's limit break. During a battle, you can initiate your quickening, and then, while your party member is doing this super flashy, awesome thing, you have to select the next quickening to continue a combo chain. At that point, it pivots to the next character, and it keeps going until you run out of charges. The thing is, sometimes you get lucky, and the option to refill a character's mist will show up, ensuring that you can keep the combo going even longer than expected. However, the shuffling time limit gets smaller and smaller the more quickenings you perform, and it gets harder to maintain. There is definitely a luck element to this system, so sometimes it deals out awesome damage, and other times it strikes out. The animations are cool, but you're going to be seeing them over and over again, like this is Final Fantasy VIII. But my big problem is that in the original game, mischarges are tied to MP. So if I waste all my charges and strike out with my quickenings, then I will have absolutely no magic when I return to the fight. Curaga, Thundaga, can't use them, not unless I drink a shitload of ethers to get my MP back. Such an impressive game with so many flawed executions. I guess the last thing I'll talk about is the game's super boss. So once you've done the majority of hunts, after you've taken out the big bad Hellworm, Mont Blanc warns you about the most dangerous monster in all of Ivalice. This monster is called Iazmat. And what a perfect encapsulation of Final Fantasy XII. This monster has 50 million HP. And keep in mind, in the original game, your party could not hit beyond 9,999. For most players, it took hours to defeat this guy. Hours, plural! Oh, and one thing I learned the hard way was that when its health is down to its last third, it will cast Reflect on the party. If you cast Curaja, the ultimate healing spell, because you're barely paying attention to the 2-hour battle, you will completely refill its health bar and will have to start from the very beginning. I cannot fathom this buffoonery. I can't tell if Final Fantasy has become a parody of itself, or if they're just fucking with us. How could I? Dirge of Cerberus exists, for Christ's sake! To me, it always felt like Square wanted to retain their identity as the king of RPGs, so they made everything bigger and longer. Whether it was a dungeon or a super boss, they gave us the mega RPG that we all wanted. Take a look at how big our dick is! But ultimately, it comes at the cost of pacing, common sense, and just overall enjoyment.
It's annoying.
I'm sorry.
KOTOR, despite being a smaller game, was an RPG I spent way more time with. Because the treasure you found mattered, the game didn't play itself, the dungeons and battles never overstayed their welcome. To me, there were just clear differences in execution. All the content in the world doesn't matter if the gameplay isn't fun. When I defeated Iazmat for the first time, I wasn't overjoyed that I finally beat it, I was relieved that it was finally over. Again, it's not a terrible, terrible game. I respect the hell out of the ambition and the scope of this title. I could see why someone would enjoy the Gambit system. But for me, the gameplay just left me feeling empty. But, that being said, a lot of the problems that I talked about are no longer problems. Why? Because in 2017, Square Enix would re-release this entry for the PlayStation 4, PC, and eventually Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. And that re-release is Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age. And this version is actually based on a previous version of the game that was only available in Japan. Final Fantasy XII International Zodiac Job System. Yes, that is the game's title. At its heart, the game is still Final Fantasy XII. It's the same locations, it's the same battle system, it's the same storyline, it's the same game. But so many things have been changed or tweaked around that it actually feels pretty different. The biggest change comes with the license boards. In the original game, everyone had the same license board. They could all learn every single ability, use every single weapon, and so by the end, every character basically felt the same. Again, you were encouraged to play characters a certain way to reduce grinding, but there were no actual restrictions. But in Zodiac Age, you now have to select a job class. Whether a knight, a black mage, a monk, a time battle mage, you now have to assign your characters a certain identity. But here's the kicker. It's not a job system like in Final Fantasy 3, 5, or 10-2. When you commit to a job, that's it. No takebacks. You must stay with that class for the rest of the game. Yeah, we're going old school on this thing. And man, what a rude awakening for the first playthrough. I must have spent 40 minutes deciding what I wanted my three main characters to be. Oh jeez, oh fuck, what do I make Vaughn? Oh god! You can always look at the license boards before you commit to them, but oh boy, what a choice to make. The safety net is gone. Although apparently in the Switch and Xbox versions, Mont Blanc can reassign your classes now? Hey! I'm using the latest version on my PlayStation 4 and I don't get that option! Boo! Square Enix are cowards! But to compensate for the lack of abilities, the game has been rebalanced to be much easier and, oh, I guess you're wondering why everything's moving so fast. Speed up feature, baby! Thank God for this. Ivalice is a big place, and going from point A to point B can be mighty exhausting. But not anymore, since I can blast through with sonic speed. The Sand Sea doesn't take 2 hours anymore. The Pharaoh's Tower can be cleared under 1 hour. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It was so easy to replay the game through this version, let me tell you. I actually got to the final boss in about 15 hours. Yeah, that quickly. I had the speed on pretty much the entire time. I mean, it's not like it's hard to play that way. After all, I'm using the Gambit system. The game plays itself. But other quality of life changes I enjoy? The mist charges are no longer tied to MP. I'm more encouraged to use quickenings now that I don't have to worry about losing my magic. Good. Should have been like that from the very beginning. And now when you summon Espers, their health bar is much bigger, they stay out a lot longer than the 2 minutes or so they had in the original, and you can manually control them. Thank you! Your characters can now break the damage limit. They are no longer restricted to only hitting 9,999. That, combined with the speed up feature, makes Iazmat a lot easier. It's still a shitty fight, but at least it's quicker. The game has a remastered soundtrack, although you can still listen to the original music if you want. And I actually have to applaud the visuals. I'm usually such a stickler for HD remasters of games because they can screw up character faces or textures really badly. But nah, Zodiac Age looks great. The faces feel identical to how they did on the PlayStation 2, and I really appreciate that. Plus, the audio quality of the voice acting is much improved now that they don't have to worry about DVD limitations.
After what you've done, how dare you? You're supposed to be dead.
Though I do have one complaint about how they've changed things, and it concerns the magic spells. In the original game, you always bought magic from magic shops in every single town. And really, that's all there was to it. This is how you found Protectga, Shelga, Dispel, Hastega, some really important tools for battle. In the Zodiac Age, they scattered so many of the best spells to treasure chests in the wild of Ivalice. And there are just no hints as to where these spells would be. Like, I'm talking one of the random chests in the 7 big, wide-open areas of the Cerobi Steppe. Having a speed-up feature doesn't help with the fact that Ivalice is fucking huge, and it's ludicrous expecting me to find all of these. If I have to look it up in a guide, it's not a good method. And yeah, that's basically the Zodiac Age. If the original PS2 game was just okay, then Zodiac Age has bumped it up to good. Not great, not amazing, but good. Look, it's certainly an improvement, but I still just glaze over when I'm using the battle system. The fact that I can play the game at 4 times speed is just emblematic of how mindless it is. Also, to accommodate the class system, the bosses have all been nerfed to be so much easier, and some of the intensity and fun kinda went away when that happened. But that being said, the game does feature a trial mode, which has you going up against 100 battles that get progressively harder the longer it goes on, and you can even keep gil and loot that you find in these battles to use them in your main save file, so it all kinda balances out. Zodiac Age is the best version to play, and it's likely the one you're all gonna be playing. Anywho, folks, I think I've talked enough about this game. Let's finally get to the ending. So together with Larsa Solidor, Ash and company go to the Grand Kiltius, an esteemed holy figure looking for advice about the Dawn Shard. While visiting, they run into a Rosarian noble named Al Cid, and he warns that the Arcadian Emperor Gramus has died. Killed by his own son, Vayne Solidor, as it turns out. With Vayne declared the new emperor, the Empire now prepares a massive fleet, no doubt to start a war.
And then, the Nethicite is the coup de grace.
And so she asks the Kiltius if he knows of any power that could match the Nethicite. He mentions the Still Shrine of Miriam, a temple holding another of King Wraithwall's relics, the Sword of Kings, the only weapon capable of destroying Nethicite. They manage to retrieve it, and Balthier makes the suggestion that if Arcadia were to have Nethicite, it would no doubt be holed up in the Draklor laboratories. How does he know this? Well, as it turns out, Balthier used to live in Arcadia. Not only that, but his father is the head researcher from that laboratory, an eccentric, power-hungry man named Cid, a man who was so obsessed with Nethicite that he drove his son away, never to return.
He'd babble nonsense, blind to aught but the stone's power.
Like I said,
He'd talk about some Enna, or was it Vena? No matter.
After sneaking through another monster-filled dungeon, the gang managed to sneak into Arcadia. And they also managed to infiltrate the Draklor laboratories, where they meet not only Cid, but a man named Redis who's shown up to confront him after seeing Nethicite destroy the Leviathan.
What's that? The Princess of Dalmasca come to visit.
A trial for Ashelia Banargan Dalmasca!
You lust for the stone's power, do you not?
And then there's a boss fight with Cid. I think this is the first time that a Cid has been an enemy in the series.
A worthy daughter of the Dynast King. You would do well to go to Girovegan. Who knows? You may receive a new stone for your trouble. I, too, make for Girovegan. Give chase if you dare it.
So he takes off, and after getting acquainted with the sky pirate Redis, the group decide they have no choice but to follow Cid to the lost mystical city of Girovegan. Because if the Empire gets another Nethicite, that'll spell major doom for the world. Using the power of Belias, an Esper only a descendant of Wraithwall would have, they venture deep into the bowels of this strange location, eventually finding a gigantic crystal. And yes, this is the Great Crystal. It's a really fun dungeon. But at the center of this crystal lies not Nethicite, but instead a higher power.
Where is everyone?
Fear not, Princess of Dalmasca. We, O Curia, have chosen you. And you alone.
Okay, so this is a doozy of a revelation, but it's revealed that inside the Great Crystal lies the Ikuria, gods who have lived for centuries, controlling the fate of humanity by bestowing power among chosen warriors. One warrior being King Wraithwall, aka the Dynast King. And since Ashe is descended from him, she is now their chosen. So they give her a giant sword known as the Treaty Blade, and they want her to find the Sun Crest. The Sun Crest is basically the source of all Nethicite in Ivalice. The Dawn Shard, the Midlight Shard, every one of Wraithwall's relics came from using the Treaty Blade on the Sun Crest. And now, it's Ashe's turn.
Take revenge against those who stole your kingdom. Fulfill your role as savior. Administer judgment. Destroy them all.
Destroy them all? The Empire?
And this whole entire time, there has been a rogue heretic Ikuria that's been helping the Empire study the Nethicite. So every time it seemed like Cid was talking to an invisible person, he was actually speaking to the heretic, Vena. This Vena has been helping out not just Cid, but also Vayne Solidor in trying to gather Nethicite and destroy the Wraithwall legacy, to eliminate the chosen bloodline and...
the reins of history back in the hands of man.
So yes, gods have been manipulating everything from behind the scenes. And to add to Ashe's conflict about revenge, she now has a higher power telling her to do it.
They may be gods, but we are the arbiters of our destiny. Your Highness, I'm against this. The Empire must pay, but destruction...
So with their new direction, they fly off to the Ridorana Cataract, where the giant Pharaoh's Tower looms over the sky. Another dungeon with another trinket. This story's a bit repetitive, I know. Anywho, 3 hours later, they eventually reach the top of this awful fucking tower, and meet face to face with the Suncrest.
King Wraithwall stood here. With this sword, he cut the Suncrest.
But you're going to use the sword to destroy the Suncrest.
After using the Treaty Sword, the cocoon of the Suncrest reveals itself, along with the specter of Lord Rassler. He seems to disapprove of Ashe using the Sword of Kings.
Rassler, my prince, our time was short. Yet I know this. You are not the kind to take base revenge!
You are our saint, Ashalia Banargan. You must use the Nethicite. You must be the one to straighten history's weave.
I am no false saint for you to use.
Ashe realizes that her kingdom always had Nethicite at their disposal, but they never used it. That wasn't the Dalmascan way. It's not who she is. Arcadia doesn't deserve destruction. But before they can destroy the Suncrest, good old Dr. Cid shows up once again with Vena at his side. He instructs the Ikurian to release all of the mist inside the Suncrest.
Shards of Nethicite, cocoon of the Suncrest, spill forth your mist upon this Ivalice! Let's see its sky be awash in it, that Bahamut may come and drink his fill!
So after another boss fight with the Mad Doctor, the manufactured Nethicite that courses his bones ultimately leads to his demise. But the damage seems to be done as the mist is pouring out so much that Ashe even struggles to reach it. It's then that the Sky Pirate Redis, oh, he was always there by the way, takes the Sword of Kings and pushes onward with all his strength to destroy the Crest once and for all. The resulting blow triggers an explosion that somehow Vaughn and Ashe don't get hit by because they magically teleported to the Strahl somehow. I know the tower has an elevator, but it's still really confusing how they got on it so quickly like that, but whatever. They get to the mainland and run into Al Cid, and the Rosarian noble has some bad news. The Resistance, led by some Rosarian members, made a preemptive attack on Imperial forces, and so now Vayne's declared war. Marquis Ondor and the rest of the insurgents have no choice but to take to the fight, but unfortunately, the battleground is Dalmasca, specifically Rabanastre. Not only that, but all the mist that leaked out of the Suncrest has now poured into a giant fucking airship known as the Bahamut, and Vayne's in complete control of the thing, willing to destroy Rabanastre with its Nethicite power if necessary.
By the gods!
Carrier Galifard, she's lost!
Don't worry, the Creel Val will replace it right away. I feel like the Bahamut is a callback to the floating palace from Final Fantasy II. But anywho folks, this is the final area of the game, and I remember thinking, wow, this sprung up on us quick, huh? I don't know, I guess I was expecting more interactions between the heroes and the villains. The first time Vayne talks to Ash is at the end of the game. They never talked to each other before this. Think of all the big villains of the series. Kefka, Sephiroth, Kuja, Seymour. They're always getting in our faces, taking us on once or twice. Vayne? Nah, he's just chilling in Arcadia most of the time. Not a bad villain, but, you know, you just want more. So what's the plan? Why, during the middle of a big battle, we fly the Strawl onto the Bahamut, find Vayne Solidor, and either make him surrender or just straight up kill him. Do we have a better plan? There's only 6 of us! But I guess it doesn't matter, because as soon as they avoid all the artillery fire, they dock onto the Bahamut with no issues whatsoever. This is not a full dungeon. My theory is that Square felt bad for making the Pharaoh's Tower drag out for 3 hours, because from the docks, it's literally 2 rooms, and then they're at the elevator where Vayne is waiting. He has no soldiers guarding him. He's just in this battle arena for no reason other than we need a place to fight the final boss. He was just in the command center. Why did he leave? I'm just saying, the ending might feel a little rushed. Game's gotta have a final boss fight, right? But before you fight Vayne, you take on Judge Gabranth, who is feeling pretty down in the dumps ever since the Emperor died. Being a lapdog for Vayne and seeing that his brother still has dignity confounds the Judge Magister.
How is it that you have survived? Is it not because you defend Lord Larsa?
Silence! All was stripped from me. Only hatred for the brother who fled our homeland remains mine.
And then Judge Gabranth gets curb stomped. He is the first of 4 boss fights after all. But at the top lies Vayne Solidor, the Arcadian Emperor.
Weep for Dalmasca, for she is lost.
No, brother. I will not. Though I lack your power, I will still persist.
Bold words, child.
Final boss time. The first phase was kind of funny because I kept walking away from him while Balthier kept slashing his back. He didn't seem to care, and then he died. But his second form?
Manufactured nethicite.
Vayne turns into a goddamn Super Saiyan, Jesus Christ! But with help from Gabranth, who swore an oath to defend Larsa, we beat him yet again. Hell, Vaughn of all people gets the finishing blow, knocking Vayne over the railing where he retreats outside.
Penna! I have failed us both. I am no Dynast King. You must find another, one who might realize your ambitions.
They are fulfilled beyond your knowing.
The Suncrest is gone, as is the Age of Stones. The Okuria can no longer meddle in man's affairs. Vina got what they wanted. And the Okuria were dicks anyway, so... was Vina even really a villain? Either way, as one last gesture, Vina merges its body with Vayne Solidor. The resulting combination grants him unbelievable power, and he manages to suck up tons of machinery from the Bahamut to turn himself into a cyborg angel god monster. Because of course he does. I didn't find the final boss hard. Didn't need to use mega elixirs or anything. Just played with the gambits on, and the game finished itself. Even with the power of a god, he just can't handle 6 people with a license board. The Tyrant King is dead, and everything worked out. Oh right, there's a battle going on! I'm guessing because Vayne sucked up important parts from the ship, the Bahamut is now out of action. So everyone escapes in the Strawl, but Judge Gabranth isn't going to make it. And so, in his final moments, he asks his brother Bosch to protect his master Larsa, for he is the beacon of hope that Arcadia needs.
Attention, this is Larsa Farinus Solidor.
My brother Vayne has died with honor in battle. The Imperial fleet is now under my command.
I confirm what Judge Magister Gabranth and Larsa Solidor have said here.
Please stand down your attack. The war is over. Ivalice looks to the horizon.
A new day has dawned. We are free.
And just like that, these 2 kingdoms find unity. The war is over. 1 year later, we get an epilogue that's narrated by Penelo. And everyone got a pretty sweet, happy ending, all things considered. Dalmasca is free again, back to the way it was during King Ramanas' time. The Bahamut is still sticking out of the ground outside of Rabanastre. Hey, I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to risk tipping it over either. Princess Ashe is now Queen Ashe. She rules Dalmasca, while Larsa Solidor rules Arcadia. And at his side is Bosch von Ronsenberg, now living up to the mantle of his brother, eternally sworn to protect the young emperor. Balthier and Fran are still doing their sky pirate business, and as for Vaughn and Pinello, they're not too far behind. Vaughn takes off in his newly acquired airship and proceeds to go on a completely new adventure. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Final Fantasy XII. This game is jam-packed with content. The storytelling, from the staging to the localization to the voice acting, is all really top-notch. It still has a robust list of spells and techniques, tons of side quests to do. It's not slouching on the RPG aspect at all. I just personally don't love how this game introduced automation into the franchise. There's some really clumsy design choices in here that bloat the game with unnecessary stuff. And while well told, the story does have its issues and won't be for everyone. But hey, it's always been critically received well, and with the new fixes and features introduced into the Zodiac Age, they've done a lot to improve that initial release. I'd hesitate to recommend the original PS2 game, but Zodiac Age is a lot more accessible. So if you like the idea of the game handling tasks for you, of being a sort of coach to the party members, then by all means, check it out. There is also a sequel game, Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings. This is a DS title where you play as Vaughn and Pinello as they go on an adventure as sky pirates. It doesn't play like the original and even has some pseudo real-time strategy elements. Is it good? I don't know. I personally haven't played it. But I have played Final Fantasy Tactics, and I love that game. If you want to see Matsuno's impeccable storytelling with strategic gameplay, get this game for either the PlayStation or the PSP. The latter contains new features, including the option of recruiting Balthier into your party. There is also the Tactics Advanced series. People don't praise it as much because of the judge mechanic, but I still think it's worth checking out. I have a lot of respect for Final Fantasy XII. It may not have my ideal gameplay, but at least it still brings so much to the table. So much of what you'd be proud to call Final Fantasy. Perhaps I was ungrateful. Little did I know, this series was about to get worse. So much worse. Coming up next, we're entering the 7th generation. Final Fantasy's finally getting high-definition graphics in a time when JRPGs started to lose their luster. And to be frank, I'm not looking forward to this next one. If you thought I was too harsh on 12, you ain't seen nothing yet. Next time, I look at Final Fantasy XIII.